أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: ويسألونك عن اليتامى قل إصلاح لهم خير وإن تخالطوهم فإخوانكم والله يعلم المصلح من المفسد والله يعلم المفسد من المصلح ولو شاء الله لأعنتكم إن الله عزيز حكيم. And they ask you concerning orphans, say, improving their condition is best. And if you can partner with them, they are bonded with you in faith. And Allah knows who intends harm and who intends good. Had Allah willed, He could have made it difficult for you. Surely Allah is Almighty, All-Wise. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As we continue in our journey in explaining the verses that begin with يَسْأَلُونَك, they ask you. We continue in our Tafsir series regarding the verses of يَسْأَلُونَك, they ask you. We reached this verse in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked about orphans. Why was he asked about orphans? What happened for them to ask about orphans? The Quran addresses the topic of orphans in many verses and in several chapters. And sometimes the Quran speaks very harshly. Do not approach the money of orphans. Do not touch the money of orphans. He who takes the money of orphans or eats, the Quran says eats the money of orphans, which actually means takes. Then it's as if he is eating fire in his stomach. We see lots of verses that emphasize on not touching an orphan's money. If you're trusted, if you have orphans at home, a nephew, a niece, a relative, a friend, and you have been trusted with their orphans, make sure that you don't tamper with their money, you don't take their money for yourself. So there's a lot of emphasis, as we shall see in the coming verses, as we shall see later on. So some of the companions of Rasulullah, they didn't know what to do. What should we do? We have orphans at home. The Quran is saying, don't touch the money of the orphans. Make sure that you don't tamper with the money of orphans. And we have orphans at home. We have money that belongs to them. We buy them food, we buy them clothing. And when we sit on the dinner table, the food of the orphans is on the dinner table, and our food is also on the dinner table. It might mix. We might accidentally eat from their food. They might eat from our food by accident or intentionally. We might use some of the orphans' money unintentionally, or maybe out of need. You know, someone who takes care of orphans, maybe they also need some money that they will use from an orphan's fund, for example. So what do? Some of the Sahaba, some of the companions of Rasulullah who had orphans at home, relatives, cousins, nephews and nieces, they took them out. They said, you know what? Because the Quran emphasizes on not nearing orphans' money, then I don't want to have anything to do with them. Let someone else take care of these orphans. I don't want to get in trouble and, use their money and then have hellfire, have fire in my stomach. The Quran says that he who eats the money of orphans is as if he's eaten fire. There's fire in his stomach. I don't want to be someone like that. Let someone else take care of these orphans. I don't want to be like this. Now, this was a problem as well. Now, there were a group that abandoned orphans and didn't want to have anything to do with orphans because they were afraid. They want to be cautious that they're not labeled as someone who eats the money of orphans. Now there's a problem. No one wants to take in these orphans. Hence, a group of mu'mineen came to ask Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى. They ask you about orphans. What should we do? We bring them home and we take care of them. There's a possibility we might use their money. We have to deal with their money. We take them out, then we'll be considered those who neglect orphans. So what do we do? It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Tell us what we should do so that we don't violate any law and we don't hurt any orphans and we do our religious obligation. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى. Allah answers, قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ. Say, improving their condition is best. وَإِن تُخَالِطُوهُمْ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ. And if you partner with them, then they are your brothers. And so on and so forth. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Before Islam, during the days of Jahiliyyah, there was a major social problem. And that was the problem of orphans. Orphans were abused. They were taken advantage of. You know, a father dies. You remember, because we're in a series, so some of these lectures are interconnected. If you remember a couple of nights ago, we said that the Arab, during the days of Jahiliyyah, there were three things that they loved the most: wine, poetry, and fighting, waging wars. They attacked. One tribe would attack another. They would steal their lands, they would steal their wealth, they would steal their women, so on and so forth. They were savages. They were savages. So, due to these major wars, because they had so many wars, as a result, there were a lot of casualties. A lot of people would die. A lot of the men would die. You would have a lot of widows, and you would have a lot of orphans. A lot of orphans would remain. Who would take in these orphans? Usually it was an uncle, either a paternal uncle or a maternal uncle. They would take in these kids and they would take care of them, the orphans. Or sometimes it would be a grandfather, a grandmother. Sometimes it would be a neighbor. Sometimes it would be a family friend. They would take in these orphans and they would take care of them. But what happens is, these orphans, they would get abused, either physically abused. And you know, in Arabic society, abusing children is something, unfortunately, it's a very bad habit. Over the slightest thing, you get smacked. So these orphans, they were being physically abused, sometimes sexually abused. Their money, the father died. He has an investment or a saving for their orphans, for his orphans. What happens is the uncle takes the money. Or the mother sometimes takes the money, or the grandfather takes the money. The orphan grows up, becomes mature, thinking that his father saved him money. When he wakes up, when he grows up, he sees that there's nothing remaining. None of the money is remaining. Sometimes they would marry them away. You see a little girl at the age of 5 or 6, she's given into marriage. Why? Because the man who's taking care of her, it could be an uncle, it could be a grandfather, is making money. So he sells this girl or a boy or whatever. They're very abused. They were abused. Sometimes it would be an old man who's wealthy. He would marry a little girl, an orphan. She doesn't have a father, no one to look after her, no one who feels sorry for her. She would be given. Here, we see that the Quran comes to try to solve this social problem. Try to eradicate the social issue that existed before Islam. And even in the beginning of Islam, you know, when these Arab, during the days of Jahiliyyah, they became Muslim, there's some bad habits, you know, as they say, bad habits die hard. You don't give up your habits overnight. It took Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam 23 years to work on these people, to try to eradicate their habits, to try to change them revolutionize them, to change their mentality. Changing a group of people's mentality is the most difficult task. It's the most difficult task. Right? So Rasulullah was sent to a community. They were male chauvinists. They were misogynists. They hated women. They favored boys over girls. When one of them was told that you have a newborn daughter, instead of being happy, instead of celebrating, he would be upset. He wouldn't speak to anyone. He would hide out of shame. And very difficult people. Imagine what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to deal with for 23 years. And it didn't just stop with Rasulullah. Even the Imams after him, Imam Ali alayhi salam, how much did he have to go through? And his children, Imam al-Hassan, Imam al-Hossein, and even till today we see that part of the world, they have a lot of issues to deal with. The Quran came and addressed the social problem, the problem of orphans, how to deal with orphans. That's why if you read in the Quran, so many verses that address the topic of orphans, don't be shocked, don't be surprised, because there was a problem. The Quran came to solve this problem. So we see in one verse the Quran says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا مَالَ الْيَتِيمِ. Do not even get close. Get it out of your head. Don't even get close to the money of an orphan. Who's going to ask about the money of an orphan? The father is dead. No one else cares. This orphan, the father died, might have left some money for his son or daughter. The uncle eats that money. The grandfather eats that money. The Quran says, don't even think about it. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا. Don't even go near the money of an orphan. إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Yes, unless that orphan benefits. For example, you start a business. And you're 100% sure that this business will succeed, it will bring in good money, then you could make use of that orphan's money. You could invest in that child's money. Or for example, you get a loan. You use that money, you use the orphan's money as a loan, and you give it back to him, and you give him extra. You give him a gift, or what you would call usury. Usury isn't haram if you don't ask for it. If someone gives you a loan, you give someone a loan, $1,000, and that person returns the $1,000 back to you with a $100 gift, that's halal, that's fine, because you didn't ask for it. It becomes haram when you ask for it. You tell them, I give you $1,000, but when you give it back to me, make it 1,100, make it 1,200. That becomes haram. That is riba. So if the orphan doesn't lose, that's fine. In another verse, كَلَّا بَلْ لَا تُكْرِمُونَ الْيَتِيمِ. In another verse, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. As for an orphan, do not upset. If you see an orphan, don't upset an orphan. وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. And as for a beggar, don't turn a beggar away. Don't scold a beggar. This is something that we all do. When we see beggars, especially back home, and they come and chase us and follow us, we scold them. We tell them, enough, stop chasing me. وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. In another verse, Allah says, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen a person that rejects religion? Whom? Someone who denies Allah's existence? No. Someone who denies Rasulullah's prophecy and says that Muhammad is not a messenger? No. Someone who denies the day of judgment and heaven and hell? No. Who is the one that rejects faith and religion? أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمِ. The one who rejects an orphan. The one who sees an orphan who's in need of support, but gives a blind eye. Subhanallah. A person who rejects an orphan, does not take care of orphans while he can or while she can. You can support an orphan, but you don't. That is equivalent to the rejection of faith. Because what is faith after all? What is the good in believing in Allah and the Prophet and the day of judgment and heaven and hell? But it's not translated into actions. It's not showing sympathy to others. What good is it that you have all of this belief, but it's not translated into actions? وَآتُوا الْيَتَامَى أَمْوَالُهُمْ وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى. In another verse, Allah says to those who take care of orphans, that trial them, test them when they grow older, when they're mature, test them. Test an orphan. Give him a test. How? Give him $10 and tell him to buy something with the $10. If the orphan buys something that's equivalent to $10, then this person, then this child who's now mature knows how to buy and sell. But if with $10 this orphan buys something that's worth $1, then he or she is not ready to buy or sell. So this is a test. If you see that they're wise, if they know how to buy and sell, then pass on to them their money. Now they're mature. Don't keep on holding on to their money. Now this orphan is old enough to take care of their own wealth. Give it back to them. وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغُوا النِّكَاحِ فَإِنْ آنَسْتُم مِّنْهُمْ رُشْدًا. If you see that this orphan has reached maturity, فَادْفَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ أَمْوَالُهُمْ. Give them back their money that you've been trusted with all these years. Give them. Finally, we see another verse. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ, and I mentioned this in the beginning. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ الْيَتَامَى. Those who eat the money of orphans. It doesn't literally mean eating money. It doesn't literally mean that you swallow coins and you swallow cash. No, it means that you take it for you, for yourself. You consider it yours. Those who trespass and take the money of orphans and consider it their own belongings, إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا. They are actually eating fire in their stomach, but they don't realize it. What they're doing is they're putting fire in their stomachs. وَسَيَصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. And they shall burn in hellfire. You see, this shows what a huge problem it was during the days of Jahiliyyah, the issue of orphans, their abuse, the way they were mistreated, their money is gone, physically abused, all sorts of, any sort of abuse that you can think of, it would occur to orphans before Islam. Islam came to change all of this. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So we go back to our verse. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى. They ask you, after all of this, they ask you about orphans. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى. So now what should we do? From one point, the Quran is telling us, do not approach their money, do not touch their money, don't even go near the money of orphans. And on the other side, there were some of the Sahaba that kicked out orphans from their house. As a precaution, just so that they don't touch the money of orphans, they said, you know what, let someone else take care of these orphans. We don't want to be among those who eat the money of orphans. Let someone else take care of these orphans. So they came and asked. The answer is, قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ. Say that improving their condition is best. Keep them at home. You don't need to kick them out of the house. Don't go to two extremes. You either take advantage of orphans or you completely neglect them and take them out of your house. No. أحسنتم. صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد. You don't need to go to two different extremes. Keep the orphans at your house. You may mix with them. You may eat with them. You don't need to segregate, because some, after these harsh verses, difficult verses regarding orphans were revealed, they segregated. Some of them put the orphans in their house in a different room, and they wouldn't even eat with them, just so that their food wouldn't mix, just in case they would eat the food of orphans. They didn't segregate with them. They segregated with them. They wouldn't mix with orphans. The Quran says, no, you don't have to go to that extent. Put them in your house, eat with them, mix with them, treat them as your brothers, treat them as your family members, as your relatives, but don't take their money. Don't abuse them. Treat them as your own children. You know, some of these orphans, let's say the father dies and his brother brings in his martyred brother, his children, he brings them to their house. His wife, they also have kids. Some of them, they would mistreat the orphans. The wife or the husband, they wouldn't treat the orphans as their own. You know, they would treat them differently. They would treat their children in a way and these orphans in a different way. The Quran says that that has to stop. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَعْنَتَكُمْ. If Allah wanted to, He could have made the laws pertaining orphans difficult for you. But He doesn't. He doesn't want to make things difficult for you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, when we read the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi and Ahl al-Bayt, we see that there's an immense emphasis on taking care of orphans, sponsoring orphans, taking care of an orphan, either financially, educationally, showing emotions, emotional support, showing love, kindness towards an orphan. A vast amount of hadith we can draw from the literature of Ahl al-Bayt alayhum as-salam regarding orphans. We see in one hadith by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, "Man ala yatiman," he who sponsors or supports an orphan, hatta yastaghni an, until that orphan is no longer in need, financially becomes capable, أوجب الله عز وجل له بذلك الجنة. Allah will make sure that heaven becomes mandatory upon this person, meaning this person will definitely end up in heaven. And another hadith by Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, "ما من مؤمن ولا مؤمنة يضع يده على رأس يتيم ترحما له إلا كتب الله بكل شعرة مرت يده عليها حسنة." He says, he who puts his hand on the head of an orphan. All you have to do is put your hand on the head of an orphan and brush the head of an orphan. Underneath, you will have a reward for each hair that passes under your hand. For each hair, there's a reward for you in heaven. Just for a person who sponsors or takes care or brushes the head of an orphan. And another hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, إِنَّ فِي الْجَنَّةِ دَارًا يُقَالُ لَهَا دَارُ الْفَرَحِ. In heaven, there's a house, in paradise, there's a house called the house of happiness. Only those who bring happiness to the orphans, to the hearts of orphans, may enter this house, the house of happiness, Darul Farah. And another hadith by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he would tell his companions, أنا وكافل اليتيم كهاتين في الجنة. I and a person who sponsors and takes care of an orphan are like this in heaven. And he put his index finger and his middle finger together, meaning next door neighbors in heaven. Rasulullah with someone who takes care of an orphan. In another hadith, he says, "Man ala ثلاثة من الأيتام." He who sponsors 3 orphans, كان كمن قام ليلة. He will be recorded as someone who spends the entire night in worship. You could be sleeping, you could be snoring in your bed comfortably, but in the book of Allah, because you sponsor 3 orphans, you're considered worshiping the entire night. وَصَامَ نَهَارُهُ, fasting every day, all day and every day. وَغَدَى وَرَاحَ شَاهِرًا سَيْفَهُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and will be recorded as a mujahid, someone who's entered the battlefield and is fighting for the sake of Allah. وَكُنْتُ أَنَا وَهُوَ فِي الْجَنَّةِ أَخَوَيْنِ, and I and he who sponsors, or she who sponsors an orphan, will be brothers in heaven, meaning next door neighbors. Next door neighbors. Today, my dear friends, we also have a problem. The problem of orphans didn't end the same way that we had a problem 14 centuries ago and before Islam, during the days of Jahiliyyah. Today we have orphans as well. We have orphans in Iraq, we have orphans in Lebanon, we have orphans in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in most of our countries. Thanks to the wars and the turmoil and the fighting and the resurgence in most of our countries back home, we still have a lot of orphans. A lot of these orphans suffer from poverty, they suffer from illness, they suffer from lack of education, they don't have proper schooling. Some of them suffer from abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. And what are the governments doing back home? What are our governments doing? They're busy fighting. They're busy arguing. Which minister gets which ministry. They're fighting over political positions while their citizens are rioting. Citizens are dying. Orphans are dying. And our politicians back home are too busy thinking of themselves. You see, orphans don't just need money. It's not enough to give an orphan money. An orphan, might suffer from poverty, but they also suffer from so many other things. They need education. What good is giving them money but not giving them a proper education? Now that they have an education, they need moral support and emotional support. They need so much. An orphan has lost a parent, a father, or a mother. When you lose a father, you don't just lose a breadwinner, someone who takes care of you financially, but someone who loves you, someone who shows you care, someone who shows you compassion and support. So the amount that an orphan loses by losing an orphan is incredible. Yet, despite all of that, an orphan has the potential to be the greatest human being on earth. Because the greatest human being on earth was a what? Was an orphan. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Rasulullah, before he was born, he had lost his father, Abdullah. And at the tender age of 6, he was 6 years old when he lost his mother, Amina. Rasulullah was an orphan. And Allah mentioned in Surah Al-Duha, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. Is it not that Allah found you an orphan, but He found you a family, someone to take care of you? And who was that? Who took care of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Abu Talib. Allah found Rasulullah the best person to take care of him. وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. And He found you lost, so He guided you. وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. And He found you in poverty, so He made you rich. Rasulullah, the greatest human being on earth, was an orphan, but he was taken care of. His grandfather Abdul Muttalib took care of him, and then his uncle Abu Talib took care of him. Rasulullah became a man. Rasulullah became a prophet, a messenger, and ultimately he became the greatest human being on earth. This shows that an orphan, although they might lose a father or a mother, or sometimes even both, but they still have the potential to be great human beings. They can make a contribution. They can make an offering. They can affect humanity. And I'll give you another example of a scholar, a contemporary scholar, who was an orphan, yet he achieved more than a lot of other scholars. Al-Shaheed Sayyid Muhammad Baqir Al-Sadr. The scholar who was a contemporary and who was killed at the hands of Saddam Hussein on April 9th of 1980, Sayyid Muhammad Baqir Al-Sadr was an orphan. His father, Sayyid Haydar Al-Sadr, died while Sayyid Muhammad Baqir Al-Sadr was young, was a baby. He was 2 or 3 years old. But his older brother, Sayyid Ismail Al-Sadr, took him in and treated him like his own son and raised him. And he gave him all of the support that he needed, financially, educationally, emotionally. Sayyid Muhammad Baqir Al-Sadr became that genius, became that scholar that touched so many of people's lives, his books, his achievements, his theories, his articles. It's very difficult for a Hawzawi scholar to try to compete with a person like Sayyid Muhammad Baqir Al-Sadr, who touched on so many fields in fiqh, in law, in legal theory, in tafsir, in philosophy, in economy, in theology. In any sort of field, Sayyid Muhammad Baqir Al-Sadr had something to say. He had something to offer. He had something to achieve. Although he was an orphan. He was an orphan. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, in his sermon right before the month of Ramadan, in one section, he says, وَتَحَنَّنُوا عَلَىٰ أَيْتَامِ النَّاسِ يُتَحَنَّنْ عَلَىٰ أَيْتَامِكُمْ. And show compassion to the orphans of others. People will show compassion to your orphans. And we see in Imam Ali's last will to his sons Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein on a night like this, the eve of the 20th of Ramadan, when he gathered Al-Imam Al-Hasan and Imam Al-Hussein, and he said his last farewell, أوصيكما بتقوى الله. I remind you of the piety of Allah. وَأَلَّا تَبْغَيَ الدُّنْيَا. Don't go after dunya. وَإِن بَغَتْكُمَا. Even if dunya comes after you. وَلَا تَأْسَفَا عَلَى شَيْءٍ مِّنْهُمَا زُوِيَ عَنْكُمَا. And don't be sad over something that you've missed. وَقُولَا بِالْحَقِّ. And say the truth. وَعْمَلَا لِلْأَجْرِ. And work for reward. وَكُونَا لِلظَّالِمِ خَصْمًا وَلِلْمَظْلُومِ عَوْنًا. And stand against oppressors as enemies. Let the oppressor be your enemy, and let the oppressed be your friend. أوصيكما. And then he goes on. أوصيكما وجميع ولدي وأهلي ومن بلغه كتابي بتقوى الله. Again, he reminds them, Imam Ali, he reminds his children on a night like this, reminds them of piety. And then finally he says, Allah, Allah fil aytam. Amir al-Mu'mineen. Tonight he tells me, he tells you, he tells his children. You know, a wasiyah is a will. A will is your final words. You're leaving this life. You're about to go. It's your final statement. You've been given a chance to say your final statement. Amir al-Mu'mineen summarizes his teachings, summarizes everything that Rasulullah had taught him. He summarizes it to his sons. Allah, Allah fil aytam. Take care of orphans. لا تغبوا أفواههم. Do not shut their mouths. Don't tell an orphan to be quiet. Don't tell an orphan to shut up. وَلَا يَضِيعُوا بِحَضْرَتِكُمْ. Don't let orphans be lost in your presence. Take care of orphans. Allah, Allah fi jiranikum. Take care of your neighbors. Imam Ali doesn't say if your neighbor is a Muslim or a Shi'i or from Bint Jbail or from Tibneen. Generally, your neighbor, even if it's a Christian or a Jew or a Buddhist or a Hindu. Allah, Allah fi jiranikum. Take care of them. Allah, Allah fil Quran. Take care of your Quran. Reciting it, memorizing it, understanding it, living with the Quran. Allah, Allah fil salah. فَإِنَّهَا عَمُودُ دِينِكُمْ. Don't neglect your salah. Don't forget your salah. Allah, Allah fil jihad. وَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالتَّوَاصُلِ وَالتَّبَاذُلِ. وَلَا تَتْرُكُوا الْأَمْرَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Until the end of his wasiyah. The point is, Allah, Allah fil aytam. He reminds his children of taking care of orphans, and to tell their companions and to tell their students of taking care of orphans. Amir al-Mu'mineen had 2 verses of poetry that he would read all the time. He says, مَا إِن تَأَوَّهْتُ مِن شَيْءٍ رُزِئْتُ بِهِ كَمَا تَأَوَّهْتُ لِلْأَيْتَامِ فِي الصِّغَرِ. There's nothing that takes my tears and lets my tears flow down the same way that when I see orphans when they're young. قَدْ مَاتَ وَالِدُهُمْ مَنْ كَانَ يَكْفُلُهُمْ فِي النَّائِبَاتِ وَفِي الْأَسْفَارِ وَالْحَضَرِ. Their father has died, the one who would take care of them in good times and in bad. There's a story, a narrator says that one day I was in Mecca. I was performing tawaf around the Kaaba, and I saw 2 young ladies, 2 sisters, speaking to one another, and one of them was swearing by Imam Ali, by the one who was born in the Kaaba, by the successor of Rasulullah, by the cousin of Rasulullah. I told them, hold on, do you know who this man is? She said, yes, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. I said, subhanallah, because Mecca, most of them at that time, they were not friends of Ahlul Bayt. Some of them were enemies of Ahlul Bayt. So this man was shocked to see a young girl swearing by Imam Ali. He said, do you know who this man is? She said, yes, I do know who he is. He's been to my house. He's been to our house after the battle of Siffin. My father died in the battle of Siffin. He came and visited our house. He saw my mother. She said, كيف أصبحت يا أم الأيتام? How are you, the mother of orphans? She said, بخير. We are good. As long as you're here, Ya Ali ibn Abi Talib. Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, as long as you're as long as you are our supporter, you take care of us, then we are fine. And then she called me and my daughter. She said, I had lost my eyesight. Due to a sickness and illness, I had lost my eyesight. She said, when I came and Amir al-Mu'mineen saw me, he began to cry and he began to weep, and he recited these two verses of poetry. مَا إِن تَأَوَّهْتُ مِن شَيْءٍ رُزِقْتُ بِهِ. And then he put his hands on my eyes, and my eyes opened. After days of not being able to see, I was able to see due to the blessings of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. In another case, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was walking in the streets of Kufa at night. He passed by a house. He heard children crying in the house. He knocked at the door. For Amir al-Mu'mineen, the person who knocked down the door of Khaybar, but the crying of children will let him fall to the ground. Imagine. What a brave man, but so emotional at heart. He heard the crying of children. He passed by a house. He knocked at the door. Why are these children crying? Ya Amatallah. She said, they're crying out of hunger. She did not know who Amir al-Mu'mineen was, because Amir al-Mu'mineen doesn't walk with an entourage. He doesn't have bodyguards. He doesn't have cars escorting him back and forth. Amir al-Mu'mineen would walk by himself. And if there was anyone that would walk with him, it was Qambar, his friend Qambar. So he said, why are your children crying? She said, because they're hungry. She said, because they're hungry. He said, will you allow me to come inside your house? He came and he saw young children crying, orphans, crying out of hunger. He said, where is their father? She said, he's dead. He died in a battle. He said, you don't have food? No, I don't have food. He noticed that there's a pot and in it there's water. He said, but you have a pot. She said, yes, I have a pot just so that my children think there's food in it, just so I could calm them down. Otherwise, we don't own anything. We don't have any food. Amir al-Mu'mineen rushes out. He goes to his house. He brings a sack of wheat, dates, food, and he comes back to the house. He tells her, Ya Amatallah, either you keep the children quiet and I cook, or you cook and I keep the children quiet. She said, no, I will cook. But if you can fix a fire for me. Amir al-Mu'mineen brings wood. He sets it on fire. He brings his face close to the fire and he says, Ya Ali, dhuq, taste this fire, Ya Ali. And then while the mother is cooking, she's cooking food for the children, Amir al-Mu'mineen goes and he plays with the children, keeping them busy so that their mother cooks them food. He plays with them as a child. He sits with them on the ground, playing with them playfully. And then when the food was ready, Amir al-Mu'mineen sits down and he feeds them. And he says every time he would put a bite in their mouth, he would say, Salullah an yaghfira li Ali. Ask Allah to forgive Ali ibn Abi Talib, because their father died in a battle, in one of the battles of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. This was Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is how he would treat orphans. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, again, one day he was passing by in the streets of Kufa. He saw a child crying, sitting at his doorstep, crying. He told him, why are you crying? He said, because I'm an orphan. And the children will not play with me. They tell me that you've lost your father, you're an orphan, you're not allowed to play with us. Amir al-Mu'mineen said, go to them, go to the children and tell them, I do have a father. His name is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Ali ibn Abi Talib is my father. Go and play with them. In another case, Amir al-Mu'mineen saw a child also crying, also an orphan. He told him, my child, why are you crying? He said, the neighbors have a wooden horse, and I'd like a wooden horse similar to that. Amir al-Mu'mineen went to the neighbor's house. He borrowed the horse just so that the child, the orphan, would calm down, so that he could sleep. His mother could put him to sleep. He bought the horse. The child would not stop crying. You know, when a child misses their parents, when a child misses their father, no matter what you bring them, chocolate, candy, toys, the child would not settle lest he has his father. Amir al-Mu'mineen told him, what do you want? He said, I want a horse. Amir al-Mu'mineen said, then come on my back. I will become a horse for you. Amir al-Mu'mineen got on his knees and hands and had the child get up on his back. A stranger child, because the child is an orphan. Amir al-Mu'mineen had a very sensitive spot for orphans. He could not see an orphan child cry. Now let's come to the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen on a night like this, on the eve of the 20th. On a night like this, there were orphans gathered at the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib. The real father, they've lost their father, now they were losing their father again. The children of Kufa lost two fathers. Their real father in the battle, their biological father in the battle, and their actual father, they were losing him on the 21st of Ramadan. A bunch of children, the orphans of Kufa, gathered at the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I will tell you what they did in a minute. What happened when Amir al-Mu'mineen was struck? Last night, we mentioned that Ali ibn Abi Talib was struck on his head. Amir al-Mu'mineen fell on the ground. فزت ورب الكعبة قتل ابن اليهودية. By the Lord of the Kaaba, I'm victorious. The son of the Jewish lady has killed me. عليكم بالرجل. Hold on to him. Do not let him escape. Amir al-Mu'mineen wanted to get up. He hadn't prayed Salatul Subh. You know, the salah that he was praying and he was injured in, it was Nafilatul Subh, the recommended salah before Salatul Subh. He hadn't prayed Salatul Subh. He wanted to get up to pray Salatul Subh. Imam al-Hasan tells him, my master, sit down and pray. You do not have the energy to pray. Sit down and pray. Imam al-Hasan himself led Salatul Subh in Masjid al-Kufa. After salah, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam looked to his son al-Hasan. He said, carry me to my house. Take me back to my house. I'd like to rest. Imam al-Hasan told him, my master, come to our homes. He said, no, I'd like to rest in my own house. Zainab is waiting for me at home. They carried Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen wants to go back to see his daughter Zainab alayhi salam. As they approach the house, Zainab is standing at the door. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam tells al-Hasan wal-Hussein, now let me walk, no longer, do not carry me any longer. They told him, why, ya Amir al-Mu'mineen? He said, because I do not want Zainab to see me carried. She will be worried. She will find out there's something wrong with me. They brought Amir al-Mu'mineen into the house. Now it's the eve of the 20th of Ramadan. Al-Asbagh ibn Nubata says, I was standing at the house at the doorstep of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Al-Imam al-Hasan, many people gathered, orphans, children, people from Kufa, they gathered at the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen wanting to enter. Imam al-Hasan came out. He said, my father thanks you all. He thanks you all, but please go back home. Ali ibn Abi Talib wants to rest. Al-Asbagh ibn Nubata said, I told Imam al-Hasan, don't tell me to go back home. My legs do not carry me back home. Allow me to see the face of my faster one last time. Al-Asbagh ibn Nubata comes inside. He looks at Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. He says, دخلت على أمير المؤمنين. I entered to see my master Amir al-Mu'mineen. فإذا هو مستند معصوب الرأس بعمامة صفراء قد نزف فيها. I saw him wearing a yellow turban covering his injury. واصفر لونه فما أدري وجهه أشد صفرة أم العمام. And his face had also gone pale. His face was yellow. I was not sure which one was more yellow, his face or his turban. A doctor comes. They brought a doctor to see Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. He checks out his injury. He checks to see how far the poison had reached the head of Amir al-Mu'mineen. All of a sudden the doctor says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, ahid ahdak. Say your will. The poison has reached your brain. You only have several hours to live. Here the doctor announced that to ease the pain of Ali ibn Abi Talib, he needs some milk. Milk will reduce the pain that Amir al-Mu'mineen will feel. All of a sudden, hundreds of orphans gathered at the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen, gathering at his doorstep. All of them carrying milk, saying, "This is for our father Ali ibn Abi Talib. Let him drink from this milk. Give this to our father Ali ibn Abi Talib." I say, "My master, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, you had so much love for orphans. You would cry to see one orphan cry. You would not handle seeing one orphan cry. What would you do in Karbala when you would see tens of the orphans of Imam Hussein alayhi salam running between the tents, running between the battleground, shouting for their father, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein." نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العلي الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله. اللهم لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته، ولا هما إلا فرجته، ولا عيبا إلا سترته، ولا خوفا إلا آمنته، ولا رزقا إلا بسطته، ولا شملا إلا جمعته، ولا مرضا إلا شفيته، ولا غائبا إلا حفظته وأدنيته، ولا حاجة من حوائج الدنيا والآخرة لك فيها رضا ولنا فيها صلاح إلا قضيتها ويسرتها يا أرحم الراحمين. ولأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والعلماء والشهداء نقرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. As we spend these nights commemorating Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam, and also reflecting on our lives, on our deaths, and our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these nights of Qadr, the nights of destiny, I wanted to share some verses of poetry on the reality of death, a reality that all of us must experience, a reality that so many of us have lived with over these past few years. And it begins with the journey into the grave and ends with the salvation that is the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. For what salvation does man have when he stands in the hereafter if he does not receive a glance from Fatima al-Zahra? What salvation does man have when he stands in the hereafter if he does not receive a glance from Fatima al-Zahra? When I'm lowered into my grave and all my loved ones disappear, the sins that once brought me pleasure, now they bring me only despair. I can feel the ground tighten while my lungs feel the lack of air. I see not, there's only darkness, only the void and gripping fear. How can I ever save myself from munkar and from nakir when I couldn't even restrain myself when shaitan whispered in my ear? Dead, in dead silence, only the moving of the earth I can hear. I hope in Allah's mercy, but I feel that His justice is near. How weighty were my sins, that they may tip my scale of deeds. I cry out in fear in my grave, and yet not a single soul heeds. No friends, no family, no children to rescue me in my time of need. Even the joy that was once air, I can no longer enjoy to breathe. Every day, hour, and second lived are roads that to my grave lead. The only thing left worth counting are the prayers upon prayer beads. What hope is there for me, who with his actions hadn't believed? What hope is there for me if my beloved doesn't intercede? Oh Allah, protect me from that first night I spend in my grave. How apt is it that the master is feared so much by his slave. Protect me from that day when I watch all those who I once knew leave, and I am left shrouded and alone. As a single human heartbeat I crave, and the darkness is suffocating with not an ounce of air saved, and the fear is so overwhelming that no man can pretend that he's brave. And you wonder on who you've upset, who forgot, and who forgave, because nothing can save you now save your deeds and what little you gave. When the width of the grave is tight and its narrowness is causing me pain, and I can feel the crushing of the earth, and I'm begging it to show me restraint, and I see small creatures moving, seeking the blood in my bloodless veins, and Munkar and Nakir appear, but I can't get my tongue to explain. What refuge do I have? What sort of salvation can I attain? How I yearn just one more day of life so that good deeds I can attain. What slope will ever be steeper? What hope is there that remains if in the grave I am not rescued by my beloved Hossein? What slope will ever be steeper? What hope is there that remains if in the grave I am not rescued by my beloved Hossein? And though my tongue refuses to move, from my soul I'll plead dearly. The same way I visited your grave, in my graves please visit me. Here, crushed by the dust, how I miss the scent of Karbala's dust so terribly. Because when this world crushed me in life, it was in your shrine that I found relief. And when you come, don't come alone. Bring Abbas and his chivalry. Because never have I cried out, Ya Abu Fadl, and not been saved immediately. Together, soothe my soul and ease the infliction on my body. For indeed Allah is merciful, and indeed you are that mercy. And on the day of judgment, when mankind is in fear and shaken, and my scale does not tip to good deeds, but instead to evil and sin, I'll call out to the King of Najaf. I'll call out to the King of Najaf. I'll call out to the King of Najaf, like a father is called by his orphan, because I know between his two hands rest both hell and heaven. I'll bow my head in shame, because I'm not among his best of men, but I hope that his love for me is as great as my love for him. I hope that his love for me is as great as my love for him. For I prostrated to the Kaaba, knowing that he was born with him, that Muhammad is Ali and Ali is him, no doubt and no question. In every moment of strife, a man calls out for his mother, and on this journey toward death, I'll yearn the rescue of Fatima, for it is she that is heaven, and heaven can be no other, and the pleasure of Fatima is indeed Allah's pleasure. I hope that she notices me, because I have no worth without her, and if she turns away from me, then no hell would be a greater torture. For every man yearns something, and every heart chases its desire. I thank Allah, and I pray that I yearn no more than a glance from Fatima to Zahra. It may be that we have good deeds, but our sins are abundant, and to the facade that is this world, we have no detachment. The flesh of brothers in our teeth makes our good deeds redundant, and for those who forsake their prayer is no salvation, only torment. There is no hope for us sinners on the day of judgment, which is why at the door of Fatima we bow down as servants. And if the Queen of Women notices us even for just a moment, then perhaps on Judgment Day we can say we were triumphant. Then perhaps on Judgment Day we can say we were triumphant. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.